Now, as the dust settles on Anthony Albanese's broken election promise on the Stage 3 tax cuts, there have been serious doubts now about the PM and his ministers keeping their word. It's opened up the floodgates about what other promises Albanese is potentially willing to break, like any changes to negative gearing or franking credits. The Prime Minister hasn't ruled it out, and the Treasurer today said he's not contemplating any changes.
We're not contemplating or considering resurrecting the policies that we took to the 2019 election.
Are you prepared to break other promises if there are better ways, or is this one and done?
We're not contemplating other areas.
Now, this hasn't been helped along this morning by Labor backbenchers who privately told The Australian that they want to see negative gearing revisited. Let's bring in now Nationals Leader David Littleproud. David, welcome to the show. Look, on the Stage 3 tax cuts, the Prime Minister has left the door open to negotiating with the Greens, so the package that we've seen might not even be the final version. But the question is, will he need to do this, or will your coalition support Labor's version of the tax cuts?
Well, in principle, we don't support it. This was a tax cut, a tax break for Stage 3 to be completed, a total tax package that both ourselves and the Labor Party both agreed to before the last election, went to the Australian people and got a mandate on. Before, in 1922, the Labor Party did it. The reality is this is a broken promise, and about a week and a half ago, it wasn't even on their radar, but apparently had the modelling done. And what he's done is blown up sensible, much-needed tax reform for short-term political expediency. And it hasn't even gone to address the drivers of inflation, what's keeping inflation higher longer. And instead of having temporary targeted measures, particularly for those that got the first two stages of tax relief, and stick with the Stage 3, he has blown it all up for short-term gain. Now, we'll have a look at what the legislation is, but we've got to be careful with this. Our DNA is that we want to give as much money back to the Australian people as we possibly can. They know how to spend it better than government departments, and so it's important we work methodically through this. We'll look at the legislation and we'll make a decision, but this is about basically pitting one Australian against other, predicated on what your job is, rather than sticking to what was an agreed tax reform, much needed around tax bracket creep, that is the inflation of taxation. And the fact that he walked away from it for political expedience, all thrown away that reform when there could have been targeted temporary measures for those lower middle income earners that would have alleviated much of the concern, shows that this Prime Minister doesn't have the values nor can be trusted.
Well, part of Labor's strategy here, according to Labor sources, is that this move will now wedge you and Peter Dutton, the coalition, because you'll have to make a decision. If you support the tax cuts, then Labor has a win. But if you don't, then Labor will claim that you're saying vulnerable Australians don't deserve greater tax relief. Do you think this does put you in a difficult political position?
Well, firstly, it's important to remind those lower income earners that we were the ones that gave them tax relief in Stage 1 and 2, and that we think there's a better way than rather dividing this country based on what you earn, to give that targeted temporary approach around cost of living pressures for those low and middle income earners to complement the Stage 1 and 2 that we've given them. That would have been a sensible approach, a fair approach to making sure that we could support them through this cost of living crisis that Labor's created. And when you look at what the drivers of inflation
are you going to argue
it's your power bill and your food bill.
Pardon, are you prepared to argue now, though, that lower income Australians don't deserve the extra $18 a week that the Prime Minister's saying they'll have under his package?
Well, it won't go far enough when the real wages have reduced by about $153, yet this will give them back a little over $15. There has to be something that helps those those low and middle income earners. Now, we'll obviously work through what happens in Parliament. We have to see the legislation, and there's not just the coalition that will work through this. We have to work through this with the entire Parliament, and we'll understand where we get to at that juncture. But if we become inherent with this after this sitting, then obviously going to the next election, we'll continue to try and work through to give more back to the Australian people. But we went to the last election, so did Labor, promising the completion of this tax reform, and we don't believe that it's right to walk away from it when there are other mechanisms, like temporary targeted measures, that could help those small and low-income earners.
All right. The Prime Minister isn't getting a good reception to his broken promise. As you now know, he was booed at the Australian Open last night. He's brushed this off. He claims there's a tradition of booing politicians at sporting matches. Have a listen.
The Australian Prime Minister, the Honourable Anthony Albanese. The Deputy Victorian Premier, the Honourable...
Did you expect that, Elbow?
Oh, it's a bit of tradition in Australian sport, isn't it?
It is.
Look, I'm going to come back to this in a bit more detail later in the show, but do you think that this is a reflection of his broken promise?
Oh, I think it is, and I think it's the pain that Australians are feeling, and what they want is a Prime Minister that'll unite them, not divide them predicated on your job, but look at what's ahead of you and actually go to address the real drivers of what's hurting families out there, their energy bill, their food bill, and their mortgage rates, and they're all intertwined. They're all being hurt by the decisions he's made. And I think that's the real sentiment that you're feeling, not only at the tennis, which is only a small microcosm. I think if you walk the streets of any capital city or regional town, you'll feel that pain. The real decisions that are being made by families at the checkout about whether they get fresh meat or whether they actually have fresh produce, those are the real decisions that are being made because their mortgages are up, their electricity bills are up, their fixed costs are up. They've stopped going with their discretionary spend to spend at Jerry Harvey. They lost that a long time ago, and this Prime Minister's been out of touch. And when he can't be truthful with the Australian people, then that erodes the confidence and faith, not only in the Prime Minister, but the institutions that Australians hold dear. And when the Prime Minister's done that, I think he's going to get a boo in most places he goes to at the moment because, unfortunately, he's not only let us down, he's lied to us.
Yeah, all right. Nationals Leader David Littleproud, thank you so much for your time.